I pulled into the parking lot of Caldwell Industrial Solutions at exactly 10:30 on that Monday morning in September, my hands gripping the steering wheel a little tighter than necessary. The facility sprawled across several acres in Framingham, all concrete and steel and that particular shade of industrial beige that screamed, "We make things here." I'd brought lunch for Marcus, his favorite chicken parmesan sandwich from that little Italian deli in Boston, because it was his first day working for his father-in-law, and I knew he'd be too nervous to eat properly. 2 years. 2 years of listening to Garrett Caldwell make snide comments at family dinners about artists and creative types who don't understand real work. 2 years of watching my son smile through thinly veiled insults, while Vanessa, my daughter-in-law, changed the subject or made excuses. 2 years of biting my tongue because Marcus was 29 years old, and I'd promised myself I wouldn't be the overbearing mother who interfered in her adult son's life. But today felt different. Today felt like a new beginning. Or at least, that's what I told myself as I walked across the parking lot, my heels clicking against the asphalt, the lunch bag swinging from my hand. The receptionist looked up when I entered, her smile automatic and professional. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I'm here to see Marcus Brennan," I said, keeping my voice warm and casual. "I'm his mother, Helena." Something flickered across her face. Discomfort, maybe? Or was it pity? She glanced down at her computer screen, then back up at me, and I saw her throat work as she swallowed. Mr. Brennan he's currently in the maintenance department. I can call him if you'd like." "The maintenance department?" The words came out sharper than I intended. Marcus was a designer, a graduate of the Rhode Island School of Design, with a portfolio that had won awards. What would he be doing in maintenance on his first day? "Yes, ma'am. It's downstairs, if you'd like to—" I was already moving toward the stairwell she'd indicated with a slight tilt of her head. Something cold had settled in my stomach, heavy and insistent. The stairs led down into a basement level that smelled of industrial cleaner and something else, something acrid that made my eyes water. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in a harsh, unflattering glow. I heard voices before I saw anything. A man's voice, loud and self-satisfied, echoing off the concrete walls. Then I turned the corner and saw him, my son, my Marcus, who I'd raised alone from age 4 after his father walked out. Marcus, who I'd worked 60-hour weeks to put through design school. Marcus, who was gentle and kind and talented and deserved so much better than this. He was on his knees in front of a toilet, yellow rubber gloves extending up to his elbows, scrubbing. The industrial coveralls he wore were 2 sizes too big, bunching around his waist where he'd tied the sleeves to keep them up. His glasses had slipped down his nose, and there was a smudge of something dark on his cheek. The lunch bag slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud. "Mom?" Marcus looked up, and the expression on his face, shame, humiliation, desperate hope that I wouldn't make a scene. That expression carved itself into my memory in a way I knew I'd never forget. "Well, well." The voice came from behind me, and I turned to find Garrett Caldwell standing there with his arms crossed over his chest, a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. He was a tall man, 6 feet or so, with silver hair slicked back in a style that had probably been fashionable 30 years ago. Everything about him screamed money and status, from his custom-tailored suit to the Rolex on his wrist. "Helena, come to see your boy on his first day?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up with fury so pure it felt like drowning. "I'm giving him the full Caldwell experience," Garrett continued, his tone conversational, as if we were discussing the weather. "Starting from the ground up. Literally." He laughed at his own joke, a sharp bark of sound that bounced off the tile walls. "You know what I told Vanessa when she insisted I give this boy a job? I said, 'Sweetheart, I'll hire him, but I'm not doing any favors. He'll earn his place just like everyone else.'" "Garrett," Marcus started, pulling off the gloves, but his father-in-law cut him off with a raised hand. And I was right to be cautious. Garrett walked past me, stopping just a few feet from where Marcus stood. "Because honestly, Helena, this is about the only work this vermi can handle. Bathrooms, basic maintenance. Maybe if he proves himself here, in 6 months or so, we'll see about moving him up to mopping floors." The Portuguese word, vermi, worm, hung in the air like poison. I'd built a consulting empire worth $18 million. I'd negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs. I'd stared down boardrooms full of men who thought a woman couldn't possibly understand business. But in that moment, standing in that basement bathroom, watching my son being degraded, I felt something I hadn't felt in 25 years. Powerless. "Mom, it's okay." Marcus's voice was quiet, resigned. "I don't mind starting at the bottom. Garrett's right. I need to learn the business from the ground up." "See?" Garrett spread his hands wide, still smiling. "The boy gets it. He understands that just because he married my daughter doesn't mean he gets special treatment. In fact, I hold him to an even higher standard. Can't have people thinking I'm soft just because he's family." And then I heard footsteps on the stairs, and Vanessa appeared. My daughter-in-law, 27 years old, platinum blonde hair perfectly styled, wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than Marcus made in a month back when he'd been working as a freelance designer. She took in the scene, her husband on his knees in front of a toilet, her father standing there with that satisfied smile, me standing frozen with shock and rage. And Vanessa smiled. Not a big smile, not an obvious one. Just a small upturn at the corners of her mouth, a slight crinkling around her eyes. The kind of smile that said she was in on the joke, that she understood and approved of what was happening here. "Helena." Her voice was bright, artificially cheerful. "What a nice surprise. Did you come to see Marcus on his first day? Isn't it wonderful that Daddy finally gave him this opportunity?" I looked at my son, really looked at him, at the way his shoulders had hunched forward, the way he couldn't quite meet my eyes, at the red mark on his knee from kneeling on hard tile, at the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the cleaning supplies. "Marcus," I said quietly, "get your things. We're leaving." "Mom, no!" He stood up quickly, and I saw him wince. His knees hurt. Of course they did. He'd probably been doing this for hours already. "I can't just leave. It's my first day. I need to—" "Helena, with all due respect," Garrett's voice had gone cold, the fake joviality dropping away to reveal something harder underneath. "This is between me and my employee. Marcus made a commitment to work here, and he's going to honor that commitment. Unless you're suggesting your son is the type of man who quits on his first day." The manipulation was so obvious, it would have been laughable if it weren't so cruel. Frame it as Marcus's choice, as his failure if he left. Make him choose between his mother and his pride, between his marriage and his dignity. I looked at Vanessa again. She was still smiling, but there was something else in her eyes now. Nervousness, maybe, or calculation. She knew this was wrong. She had to know. But she was standing there next to her father, silent and smiling, and that told me everything I needed to know about where her loyalties lay. "It's fine, Mom." Marcus's voice was firmer now, trying to convince himself as much as me. "Really, I knew it would be tough. Garrett's just making sure I can handle the hard work. It's actually kind of smart when you think about it. If I can do this, then everyone will know I earned my place here." I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab my son by the shoulders and shake him until he understood what was happening. This wasn't about earning respect. This was about domination, about Garrett establishing from day one that Marcus was beneath him, that he would always be beneath him, no matter what he did or how hard he worked. But Marcus was 29 years old. He was married. He had made his choice to work here, to try to win over his father-in-law, to prove himself worthy of being part of the Caldwell family. And I had learned the hard way, through my own failed first marriage and the mistakes I'd made with Richard, that you can't force someone to see what they're not ready to see. "Okay," I said, and my voice came out calmer than I felt. "Okay, Marcus, if this is what you want." I bent down and picked up the lunch bag, set it on the counter by the sink. "I brought you chicken parmesan from DeMarco's." "Thanks, Mom." His smile was grateful and sad and so painfully young. "That's really nice of you." I walked past Garrett without looking at him, past Vanessa with her perfectly styled hair and her complicit smile. I climbed those stairs back up to the main floor, walked through the lobby past the receptionist who carefully didn't make eye contact, and got into my car. And then I sat there in the parking lot of Caldwell Industrial Solutions for 10 full minutes, my hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. I didn't cry. I'd stopped crying over men and their cruelty a long time ago, but I felt something building inside me, something cold and calculated and absolutely certain. Because here's what Garrett Caldwell didn't know. I hadn't built an $18 million consulting business by being nice. I'd built it by being smart, by being strategic, by understanding that power isn't about who can yell the loudest or who can humiliate people the most effectively. Power is about information, about leverage, about knowing exactly where someone is vulnerable and being willing to exploit that vulnerability when necessary. And I'd also learned, in my 25 years of business, that men like Garrett always have vulnerabilities. Always. The ones who need to put others down, who need to establish dominance through cruelty. Those are the ones with the most to hide, the most to lose. I pulled out my phone and dialed Daniel Rourke, my VP of Operations and the closest thing I had to a best friend in the business world. He'd been with me for 15 years, had helped me navigate hostile takeovers and corporate espionage and every dirty trick the business world could throw at us. "Helena," he answered on the first ring. "How's Marcus's first day going?" "I need everything you can find on Caldwell Industrial Solutions," I said, my voice steady and cold. "Financial records, client lists, supplier contracts, employee complaints, everything. I need to know every vulnerability, every weak point, every skeleton in every closet." There was a pause. Daniel knew me well enough to understand what that tone meant. "How deep do you want me to go?" "As deep as it takes. I want to know things that Garrett Caldwell has forgotten he needs to hide." "Understood. I'll have something for you in 48 hours. I ended the call and started the car. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced back at the building one more time. Somewhere in that basement, my son was on his knees, scrubbing toilets, while his father-in-law watched and his wife smiled. They thought this was over. They thought they'd won, that they'd put Marcus in his place and that I'd accepted it because what else could I do? They had no idea what was coming, because something special was about to happen. Something that would teach Garrett Caldwell and his smiling daughter exactly what it means to underestimate a mother's love and a woman's capacity for strategic vengeance. I just had to be patient, just had to wait for the right moment, gather the right information, position all the pieces exactly where they needed to be. And then I would show them what real power looked like. I didn't drive home after leaving Caldwell Industrial Solutions. Instead, I found myself heading toward the office, toward the glass and steel tower in downtown Boston that housed Brennan's strategic group on the 18th and 19th floors. I needed to be somewhere that reminded me who I was, what I'd built, what I was capable of. The thing is, I understood humiliation. I understood what it felt like to be dismissed, to be told you weren't good enough, that you'd never amount to anything. I'd lived it. I was 23 when I got pregnant with Marcus. His father, David, was a charming man who sold medical equipment and promised me the world. We got married 3 months after we met, because that's what you did in 1991 when you were pregnant and Catholic and terrified. For 4 years, I played the role of dutiful wife. I stayed home with Marcus, cooked dinner every night, kept the house spotless, smiled when David's colleagues came over, even though they barely acknowledged my existence. David left 2 weeks after Marcus's 4th birthday. Just packed a bag one Tuesday morning and said he'd met someone else, someone who understood him better, someone who didn't have stretch marks and baby weight and exhaustion etched into every line of her face. He sent child support checks for about 6 months, then those stopped too. I had a bachelor's degree in business that I'd never used, 4 years of work experience as an administrative assistant before Marcus was born, and exactly $2,300 in savings. I also had a 4-year-old who needed to eat and a landlord who didn't care about my sob story. So I got a job. Then I got a second job. I worked as an executive assistant during the day and cleaned offices at night while my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, watched Marcus. I saved every penny I could, took night classes in management consulting, studied while Marcus slept. When he was 7, I took a massive risk and started my own consulting business out of our 1-bedroom apartment, targeting small businesses that couldn't afford the big consulting firms. The first year, I made $11,000. The second year, $32,000. By the time Marcus was 12, I was pulling in 6 figures, and we'd moved to a real house in a good school district. By the time he was 15, I had 18 employees, and we'd just landed our first Fortune 500 client. That's also when I met Richard Brennan. He was a client initially, CFO of a manufacturing company that was hemorrhaging money. I spent 3 months restructuring their operations, and somewhere in there, over late-night strategy sessions and coffee that had gone cold hours ago, we fell in love. Richard was everything David hadn't been. Stable, kind, genuinely interested in my work and my opinions. He didn't feel threatened by my success. He celebrated it. We got married when Marcus was 13, and Richard stepped into the father role like he'd been born for it. He went to Marcus's soccer games, helped with homework, taught him to drive, paid for his college application fees without being asked. When Marcus got into Rhode Island School of Design, Richard cried, actual tears running down his face, saying how proud he was, how talented Marcus was, how he was going to do amazing things. Richard died of a heart attack 8 years ago, dropping dead in the middle of a board meeting at age 59. No warning, no chance to say goodbye. 1 minute he was presenting quarterly projections, the next he was gone. Marcus was 21, finishing up his junior year at RISD. The grief nearly broke both of us, but we got through it together, the way we'd gotten through everything else. I threw myself into work, expanding the business until we had offices in 3 cities and annual revenues exceeding $40 million. Marcus threw himself into his art, his design work, creating things that were beautiful and meaningful and entirely his own. He graduated with honors, got a job at a boutique design firm in Providence, built a solid portfolio, won awards, made decent money. He was independent, successful in his own right, happy. And then he met Vanessa. It was at some gallery opening in Boston 3 years ago. Marcus came home that weekend glowing, talking about this amazing woman he'd met, how she was beautiful and smart and really got his work. I met her a month later at dinner in the North End. Vanessa Caldwell was stunning. I'll give her that. Blonde, blue-eyed, with the kind of effortless polish that comes from a lifetime of money and privilege. She wore a dress that probably cost more than my first car, and ordered the most expensive wine on the menu without glancing at the price. She was also empty. That's the word that came to mind as I watched her interact with Marcus over linguine and too much wine. Empty. She laughed at his jokes, but didn't seem to really hear them. She asked about his work, but glazed over when he actually explained his design process. She touched his arm possessively, called him babe every other sentence, and spent half the dinner checking her phone. But Marcus was in love, or at least in infatuation, and I'd learned my lesson about interfering in my son's relationships. He was 26 years old, fully adult, capable of making his own decisions. If he wanted to date a woman who seemed more interested in having a boyfriend than in actually knowing him, that was his choice. I met Garrett Caldwell 6 months later, at the engagement dinner. Marcus had proposed after dating Vanessa for 8 months, and the Caldwells insisted on hosting a celebration at their estate in Wellesley. The house was enormous, one of those old New England mansions with actual pillars and a circular driveway. I pulled up in my Mercedes, practical, professional, understated, and watched a kid who couldn't have been more than 16 in a valet uniform take my keys. Garrett opened the door himself, which I later realized was a power move. Make the guests feel like they're getting personal attention from the master of the house. Helena Brennan, he said, looking me up and down with an expression I couldn't quite read. I've heard a lot about you. All good things, I hope. I kept my voice light, professional, the same tone I used with difficult clients. Vanessa says you're quite the businesswoman. The way he said businesswoman made it sound like an insult. Self-made, she tells me, started from nothing. I prefer to think of it as starting from determination, I said, and ending up with something I'm proud of. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Well, come in. Let me introduce you to my wife. Constance Caldwell was a ghost. That's the only way to describe her. She was probably my age, but she looked older, worn down in a way that had nothing to do with physical aging and everything to do with spirit. She smiled when we were introduced, said all the right things, and then faded into the background so completely I almost forgot she was there. The dinner was excruciating. Garrett dominated every conversation, telling long stories about building his business, about his success, about all the important people he knew. When Marcus tried to talk about his design work, Garrett cut him off with, "That's nice, but let me tell you about real business." When I mentioned Brennan's strategic group, Garrett said, Consulting. That's basically just telling other people how to run their businesses, right? Never understood how that's a real skill. Those who can, do. Those who can't, consult. I smiled and took another sip of wine and said nothing, because what was the point? This man had already decided who I was, what I represented. Nothing I said would change his mind. But I watched him throughout that dinner. I watched the way Vanessa hung on his every word, laughed at jokes that weren't funny, agreed with opinions that were barely coherent. I watched the way Constance had perfected the art of making herself invisible. I watched the way Garrett's employees, because that's what the serving staff were, employees from his company that he'd brought to his home to serve us, flinched slightly when he raised his voice. And I understood exactly what kind of man he was. A bully, a tyrant, someone who needed to dominate everyone around him to feel powerful, to feel worthwhile. I pulled Marcus aside before we left that night, in the bathroom hallway where no one could overhear us. "Are you sure about this?" I asked quietly. "About marrying into this family?" "Mom, I love her." He said it with such simple conviction, such absolute certainty. "And Garrett's he's just protective of Vanessa. He'll warm up to me once we're married, once he sees how much I love his daughter." I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to explain that men like Garrett don't warm up, they don't change, they only get more demanding, more controlling. I wanted to say that Vanessa's inability to stand up to her father now meant she'd never stand up to him later, and that Marcus would spend his marriage being crushed between his wife's cowardice and her father's cruelty. But I didn't, because he was 26 years old and in love, and I remembered being young and in love and thinking I could change David, that my love would be enough to make him into the man I needed him to be. So I hugged my son and told him I supported his decision and I'd be there for him no matter what. The wedding was 2 years ago, a lavish affair at the Caldwell estate. Garrett gave a speech that was supposed to be touching, but was actually a thinly veiled insult fest about how his little girl deserved the best, and he hoped Marcus would prove himself worthy of being a Caldwell. Marcus laughed it off. Vanessa squeezed his hand and smiled. And I sat at my table, watching my son marry into a family that would destroy him, and I did nothing. For 2 years, I watched Marcus and Vanessa navigate their marriage. They lived in a condo that Garrett bought for them as a wedding gift, which meant he had keys and stopped by unannounced. Marcus continued his design work, but struggled to find clients because Garrett kept telling people at country club events that his son-in-law was still figuring things out. At family dinners, Garrett made comments about Marcus's income, about his career choice, about how real men work with their hands, build things, create tangible value. Vanessa never defended him. She changed the subject or made excuses or laughed like it was all just good-natured ribbing. And Marcus took it. He smiled and nodded and tried harder to win Garrett's approval, like it was something that could be earned rather than something that would never be given. Until this morning, when Garrett finally made his contempt official by putting my son on his knees, scrubbing toilets on his first day of work. Now, sitting in my office, looking out at the Boston skyline, I understood what I should have understood 2 years ago at that engagement dinner. This wasn't going to get better. Garrett wasn't going to warm up. Vanessa wasn't going to find her backbone. And Marcus wasn't going to save himself because he still believed that love and hard work and determination could overcome anything. He'd learned that from me, after all. That's how I'd survived David leaving, how I'd built my business, how I'd created the life we had. But I'd also learned something else in 25 years of business, something I'd never taught Marcus, because I'd hoped he'd never need to know it. Sometimes, love and hard work aren't enough. Sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to do what your opponents won't, to be harder, colder, more strategic, to use every weapon at your disposal without hesitation or mercy. I'd been playing nice for 2 years, respecting Marcus's choices, staying out of his marriage. That ended today. My phone buzzed with a text from Daniel. "Preliminary findings on Caldwell. You're going to want to see this. Coming to your office in 20 minutes. I smiled, looking out at the city I'd conquered one client, one contract, one strategic victory at a time. Garrett Caldwell had made a mistake today. He'd shown his hand too early, revealed his cruelty too openly. He'd assumed that, because I'd stayed silent at family dinners, because I'd smiled and been polite, that I was weak, that I would accept watching my son be destroyed. He had no idea who he was dealing with, and by the time I was done, he'd wish he'd never met me. Daniel arrived at my office exactly 20 minutes later, carrying his laptop and a thick folder that immediately told me he'd found something significant. He'd been with me long enough to know that when I asked for a deep dive, I meant deep enough to strike oil or hit bedrock, whichever came first. "Close the door," I said, and he did, settling into the chair across from my desk with the careful movements of someone about to deliver bad news. "How bad is it?" I asked. "For Caldwell? Catastrophic? For Marcus?" He opened the folder, spreading documents across my desk. "It's worse than you think, Helena." The first document was a financial summary. I scanned it quickly, my years of consulting experience allowing me to absorb the key points in seconds. Revenue down 38% over the last 18 months. 3 major clients lost in the past 8 months alone. Operating costs bloated by at least 20% compared to industry standards. Debt service eating up nearly 40% of remaining revenue. "He's dying," I said flatly. "The company is dying." "Worse. He's drowning and trying to hide it." Daniel pulled out another document. He took out a $7 million loan against the company 6 months ago. Used it to cover payroll and keep up appearances. The loan comes due in 8 months, and based on current trajectory, there's no way he can pay it back. I sat back in my chair, processing. So hiring Marcus wasn't about giving him a chance. It was about free labor, Daniel finished. Marcus is working for $35,000 a year. That's less than Caldwell pays his janitors. And I'm willing to bet he's not actually going to keep Marcus in maintenance. He's going to work him like a dog for a few months, then fire him for poor performance before he has to pay any real benefits or acknowledge him as a real employee. The rage that had been simmering all day flared hotter. What else? Caldwell's been faking financial statements to his remaining clients. Not egregiously, but enough that if anyone audited him, he'd be in serious trouble. He's also been delaying payments to suppliers, which is why 3 of them are threatening to cut him off. And the best part? Daniel smiled grimly. His biggest remaining client is Whitmore Automotive. They account for about 40% of his remaining revenue. And their contract is up for renewal in 60 days. Theodore Whitmore. I knew Ted had done consulting work for him 7 years ago when his company was struggling with a hostile takeover attempt. I'd helped him restructure his board and fend off the acquisition. He'd told me at the time that if I ever needed anything at all, I just had to ask. "Keep going," I said. "Employee morale is in the toilet." I talked to 3 former employees who all described Caldwell as a nightmare to work for. Screaming, public humiliation, impossible standards. He's facing 2 potential lawsuits from former employees claiming hostile work environment. His lawyer's been settling them quietly, but it's costing him. Daniel pulled out another document, this one with photos. And here's where it gets interesting. Vanessa Caldwell Brennan isn't just working as marketing director. She's on the company payroll for $95,000 a year, but according to everyone I talk to, she shows up maybe twice a week, doesn't do any actual work, and spends most of her time shopping online. "Nepotism and fraud," I murmured. "Lovely combination." "There's more." Daniel's expression turned darker. "I talked to a guy who worked maintenance at Caldwell for 3 years before quitting last month. He said Garrett has a pattern. When he hires people, he doesn't usually minorities, sometimes women. He puts them in maintenance or janitorial services regardless of their qualifications. Works them hard for a few months, then fires them for made-up reasons. He's been sued twice for discrimination, settled both times." My hands clenched into fists on my desk. So putting Marcus in the bathroom wasn't just cruelty. It's his standard operating procedure for people he wants to break. Exactly. Daniel closed his laptop. "The question is, what do you want to do about it?" I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the city. The sun was starting to set, painting the glass towers in shades of orange and gold. Somewhere out there, Marcus was probably home by now, probably sitting on the couch in that condo that Garrett owned, telling Vanessa about his day, trying to convince himself that it was fine, that it was just paying dues, that it would get better. And Vanessa was probably nodding and smiling and not defending him, just like she'd smiled this morning while her father called my son a worm. "I want to talk to Theodore Whitmore," I said. "Set up a meeting for tomorrow if possible. Tell him it's urgent and personal." "Consider it done." Daniel made a note. "What else?" Get me everything you can on Garrett's loan. Who holds it, what the terms are, whether there's any way to accelerate repayment. And I want to know about every single client and supplier he has. Contact information, contract details, how happy they are with his service. You're going to go after his business. I'm going to make him an offer he can't refuse. I turned back to face Daniel. And when he refuses it anyway, because men like Garrett always do, I'm going to systematically dismantle everything he's built until he's begging me to take it off his hands. Daniel nodded slowly. And Marcus? Marcus is going to be angry with me. The words hurt to say, but they were true. He's going to think I'm interfering, that I'm overreacting, that I should let him handle his own problems. But I'd rather have him angry and safe than grateful and destroyed. For what it's worth, Daniel said quietly, I think you're doing the right thing. I've seen what happens to good people who stay in toxic situations. They don't get stronger. They get broken. After Daniel left, I sat alone in my office for a long time, watching the city lights come on one by one. My phone buzzed several times with messages, but I ignored them until I saw one from Marcus. Thanks for lunch today, Mom. And for understanding. I know the job isn't glamorous right now, but I'm going to make this work. Love you. I stared at that message for a full minute before responding. Love you too, sweetheart. I'm proud of you. I wasn't proud of him staying in that job. I was proud of him for being the kind of person who believed in second chances, who thought the best of people, who tried to find dignity in degrading work. But that pride was tangled up with fear and rage and a fierce protectiveness that made my chest ache. I drove home to my house in Brookline, the 4-bedroom colonial I'd bought when Marcus was 15, and I'd finally felt secure enough to stop renting. Richard had loved this house. He'd spent weekends working in the garden, had built the deck in the backyard with his own hands. Walking into it without him still felt wrong sometimes, even after 8 years. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the deck, looking at Richard's garden. He'd planted roses, dozens of them, and I'd kept them going after he died, even though I didn't have his green thumb. They were blooming now, deep reds and soft pinks, and I wondered what he would say about all of this. Richard had been gentle like Marcus, but he'd also had a spine. He would have told Garrett Caldwell exactly where to shove his job offer. He would have stood up for Marcus, would have made it clear that family protected family, that kindness wasn't weakness, that there were lines you didn't cross. But Richard was gone, and Marcus had learned his gentleness without learning the steel underneath it. That was my fault. I'd been so busy building my business, proving I could survive without a man, that I'd forgotten to teach my son that sometimes survival means fighting back. I was still sitting there when my phone rang. Unknown number, but with a Wellesley area code. I answered it. Helena? The voice was quiet, almost whisper soft. It's Constance. Constance Caldwell. I sat up straighter. Constance, is everything all right? I'm in my car. She sounded nervous, scared even. I drove to the grocery store so Garrett wouldn't hear me calling. I need to tell you something about Marcus. My heart rate picked up. What is it? Garrett's not planning to keep him on. I heard him talking to his lawyer this afternoon. He's going to keep Marcus in maintenance for 6 months, document every tiny mistake, and then fire him for cause. He wants to make it look like Marcus failed, so Vanessa will lose respect for him and ask for a divorce. The wine glass in my hand could have shattered from how hard I was gripping it. Why are you telling me this? There was a long silence. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost couldn't hear it, because I've lived with Garrett for 35 years. I've watched him destroy people for sport. I've stayed quiet because I didn't know how to do anything else, because I was scared, because it was easier to disappear than to fight back. Her voice broke slightly. But I can't watch him do it to Marcus. That boy is kind. He doesn't deserve this. And you're not like me. You have power. You can stop this. Constance, are you safe? Is he doesn't hit me, if that's what you're asking. He makes you feel small, like you don't exist, like your thoughts and feelings don't matter. She took a shaky breath. I know what you're thinking, that I should leave, that I should have left years ago. But I'm 59 years old, Helena. I haven't worked in 35 years. I don't have my own money. I don't have anywhere to go. I'm trapped. You're not trapped, I said firmly. Constance, if you want to leave him, I can help you. I can connect you with lawyers, help you find a place to live, help you get on your feet. You don't have to stay there. Another long silence. I don't know if I'm that brave, but I can at least do this. I can at least warn you, give you the information you need to protect Marcus. What else do you know? The company is in trouble. Bad trouble. Garrett lies to me about a lot of things, but I've been married to him long enough to read the signs. He's stressed all the time, drinking more, snapping at everyone. He took out a huge loan, and it's not helping. And Vanessa, her voice turned sad. Vanessa is pregnant, 6 weeks along. She told me yesterday. She hasn't told Marcus yet because she wants to wait until he's settled in his job. I closed my eyes. Pregnant. That complicated everything. That gave Vanessa even more reason to stay close to her father, to prioritize his approval, to keep Marcus under Garrett's thumb. Thank you for telling me, I said. This information, it matters. It helps. What are you going to do? I'm going to protect my son, whatever it takes. Be careful, Helena. Garrett is vindictive. If he thinks you're going after him, he'll make it personal. He'll try to hurt Marcus even more just to punish you. Then I'll have to make sure I move fast enough that he doesn't have time to react. I softened my voice. Constance, the offer stands. If you want out, I will help you. You just have to ask. Maybe. She sounded doubtful, but also, for the first time, a little bit hopeful. Maybe someday. I have to go now. He'll notice if I'm gone too long. She hung up, and I sat there in the gathering darkness, processing everything I'd learned. Garrett was planning to fire Marcus in 6 months after documenting a failure trail. Vanessa was pregnant and hadn't told her husband. Constance was a prisoner in her own marriage, too scared and too dependent to leave but brave enough to make this one phone call. And I was done playing nice. I went inside and opened my laptop, pulling up the contact information for Theodore Whitmore. Daniel had already emailed me his schedule. He was available for lunch tomorrow at his office in Worcester. I typed out an email. Ted, I need to discuss a business opportunity that I think will interest you greatly. It involves Caldwell Industrial Solutions and a potential partnership that could save you significant money while upgrading your service quality. Are you available for lunch tomorrow? This is time sensitive. Best, Helena. The response came back within 10 minutes. Helena, I always have time for you. 12:30 tomorrow at my office? I'll have my assistant order lunch. Looking forward to hearing about this, Ted. Next I called my attorney, Margaret Chen. Yes, the same Mrs. Chen who had watched Marcus when he was little. She'd gone to law school in her 40s, and I'd hired her the day she passed the bar. Now she was one of the best corporate attorneys in Boston. Margaret, I need to know the legal implications of acquiring a company that's in financial distress. Specifically, what happens to existing employees, what kind of due diligence I'd need to do, and how quickly it can be done. Helena, it's 9 o'clock at night. I know. I'll pay overtime. This is important. She sighed, but I heard her laptop opening. Tell me what you're planning. I told her everything. About Marcus, about Garrett, about the financial situation, about my plan to acquire Caldwell Industrial Solutions, whether Garrett wanted to sell or not. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then, legally, this is doable. Ethically, I have no problems with it. The man is abusing his power and destroying people's lives. Practically, it's going to be expensive and complicated. But Helena, you need to think about Marcus. He might not thank you for this. I know. My voice came out harder than I intended. But I'd rather have him alive and angry than broken and grateful. I've seen what happens to people in toxic situations, Margaret. They don't bounce back. They carry that damage forever. I won't let that happen to my son. Then let's do it right. I'll start drafting acquisition documents tonight. In the meantime, get me everything Daniel found. I'll need to review it before we make any moves. I worked until 2 in the morning, going through Daniel's reports, making notes, building a strategy. By the time I finally went to bed, I had a plan. Step 1. Meet with Theodore Whitmore and convince him to drop Caldwell as a supplier. That would cut Garrett's revenue by 40% overnight. Step 2. Contact Garrett's other major clients and offer them better service through partnerships with other suppliers I had connections with. Drain his client base systematically. Step 3. Reach out to his suppliers and offer to pay cash for immediate delivery to my network of clients, cutting off his supply chain. Step 4. Once he was desperate enough, make an offer to acquire the company. Start low, because he'd be bleeding money by then. Step 5. If he refused, which he probably would out of pride, wait him out. Let the loan deadline approach. Let his creditors start circling. Then make a second offer, even lower than the first. Step 6. Take over the company, fire Garrett, install proper management, and give Marcus an actual position doing actual work that matched his skills. It was aggressive. It was ruthless. It was exactly the kind of corporate maneuvering that I'd built my reputation on, and it was the only way to save my son. I finally fell asleep around 3, and when I woke up at 7, I had a text message from Marcus. Second day on the job. Wish me luck. Garrett says if I do well this week, I might get moved to floor maintenance instead of bathrooms. Progress. I stared at that exclamation point, at my son's desperate optimism, at the way he was trying to find dignity in degradation, and I got out of bed and put on my best suit, the charcoal gray Armani that I wore when I needed to intimidate, and drove to the office. It was time to go to war. The meeting with Theodore Whitmore was scheduled for 12:30, but I arrived at his Worcester office at noon. I wanted time to collect my thoughts, to make sure my presentation was perfect. Ted's company, Whitmore Automotive, was housed in a sprawling complex that looked more like a college campus than a manufacturing facility. Clean, modern, efficient. Everything that Caldwell Industrial Solutions wasn't. Ted met me in the lobby himself, a tall man in his early 60s with gray hair and a warm handshake. Helena, it's been too long. You look well. You too, Ted. Thank you for making time on such short notice. He led me to his office, a corner space with windows overlooking the production floor. Lunch was already set up, salads and sandwiches from a local deli. Nothing fancy. Ted had always been practical like that, even with his net worth hovering around $70 million. So, he said once we were settled, tell me about this opportunity involving Garrett Caldwell. I have to admit, the timing is interesting. Our contract with him comes up for renewal in about 50 days, and I've been having serious concerns about quality and delivery times. I took a sip of water, organizing my thoughts. This was it, the first domino. Ted, how much do you know about Caldwell's financial situation? Not much. Should I know more? I pulled out a folder. Not the full report Daniel had compiled, but a condensed version highlighting the key points that would matter to Ted. Caldwell Industrial Solutions is in serious financial trouble. Revenue down 38% over 18 months, major debt obligations coming due, quality control issues, supplier problems. The company is circling the drain, and when it goes under, you'll be left scrambling for a new parts supplier in the middle of your production cycle. Ted's expression hardened as he flipped through the documents. How did you get this information? I have good researchers. And Ted, this isn't just about warning you. I have a proposal. I leaned forward. What if I told you I could connect you with 3 alternative suppliers, all of whom I've worked with through my consulting clients, all of whom can provide better quality parts at 15% below what you're currently paying Caldwell? I'd say I'm listening very carefully. I want to acquire Caldwell Industrial Solutions, either through purchase or by letting it collapse and buying the assets at liquidation. But I need leverage to force Garrett's hand, and the fastest way to do that is to cut his revenue stream. If you don't renew your contract, he loses 40% of his remaining income. He'll be desperate within weeks. Ted sat back, studying me. This is personal. This isn't just business. You're right. It's both. I met his eyes steadily. Garrett Caldwell hired my son 2 days ago. Put him on his knees scrubbing toilets despite having a degree from RISD and a successful design career, called him a worm, and my daughter-in-law stood there smiling while it happened. Ted's jaw tightened. I met Marcus at your Christmas party 3 years ago. Smart kid, talented. Why would Garrett do that? Because he's a sadistic bully who gets off on humiliating people he considers beneath him. And because he's planning to document 6 months of manufactured failures and fire Marcus for cause, trying to destroy his marriage to Vanessa in the process. I kept my voice level, professional. I won't let that happen. So yes, this is personal. But it's also good business. Caldwell is going under whether I get involved or not. I'm just accelerating the timeline and making sure the pieces land somewhere useful instead of getting scattered to the wind. Ted was quiet for a long moment, looking out at his production floor. 7 years ago, you saved my company. You remember that hostile takeover attempt? I was ready to give up, sell out, take whatever deal they offered. You told me that sometimes the only way to win is to be willing to fight harder and smarter than your opponent thinks you're capable of. I remember. You also told me that power without purpose is just noise, but power used to protect what matters is unstoppable. He turned back to me. I'm guessing Marcus is what matters. He's everything that matters. Then let's do this right. Ted pulled out his phone. I'm going to call my procurement director right now and tell him not to renew the Caldwell contract. I'll cite quality concerns and delivery delays, which are both true. He won't be able to argue. And I'll have our legal team draft a letter terminating the relationship, effective in 30 days rather than 50, citing the early termination clause in our contract. My heart was pounding, but I kept my expression calm. Thank you, Ted. Don't thank me yet. You're taking on a nasty piece of work. Garrett Caldwell has a reputation in the industry, and it's not good. He's vindictive. When he feels threatened, he lashes out. Ted's expression turned serious. If he figures out you're behind this, he might go after Marcus even harder. Are you prepared for that? I'm prepared to move fast enough that he doesn't have time. I pulled out another document. I have 3 other major clients of his lined up to contact this week. I have 2 of his key suppliers ready to cut him off for payment delays, and I have an attorney drawing up acquisition papers. By the time Garrett realizes what's happening, it'll be too late for him to do anything except sign over his company. You're going to crush him. It wasn't a question. I'm going to give him a choice. Sell with dignity and walk away with enough money for a comfortable retirement, or fight me and lose everything. What he does with that choice is up to him. Ted nodded slowly. You know what I like about you, Helena? You don't pretend to be something you're not. A lot of people in your position would dress this up as purely business, as if the personal element didn't exist, but you're honest about it. You're protecting your son, and you're not apologizing for having the power to do it. I spent too many years apologizing for taking up space, Ted. For being ambitious, for being successful, for not being soft enough or accommodating enough. I'm done with that. I gathered my documents. My son is kind and gentle, and those are beautiful qualities. But the world eats people like that alive if they don't have someone watching their back. I'm that someone. Then let's make sure you have everything you need. Ted stood up, extending his hand. Consider the Caldwell contract terminated. I'll have the letter sent this afternoon. And Helena, if you need anything else, connections, references, financial backing, you call me. I don't forget my debts. I shook his hand, feeling the weight of what I'd just set in motion. This was the point of no return. Once Ted's termination letter hit Garrett's desk, the war would be official. There would be no going back, no pretending this was just business as usual. And somewhere in Framingham, my son was probably on his knees in a bathroom, scrubbing toilets and believing that hard work and persistence would win him respect from a man who was incapable of giving it. I drove back to Boston with my hands steady on the wheel and my heart racing. By the time I reached my office, Daniel was waiting with news. 3 of Caldwell's suppliers just confirmed they'll cut him off if we guarantee immediate payment for their products through our client network. And I have 2 more of his major clients ready to hear alternative proposals. He paused. Helena, once we pull these triggers, there's no stopping it. Caldwell will know someone is coming after him. Good, I said. Let him know. Let him feel what it's like to be powerless, to watch everything he built crumble while people smile and tell him it's for his own good. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to Margaret Chen. Ted's on board. Termination letter sending today. Proceed with acquisition documents. This is happening. Her response came back immediately. Understood. I'll have everything ready. Helena, be careful. And maybe warn Marcus. He deserves to know what's coming. I stared at that last sentence for a long time. Warn Marcus. Tell him what I was doing. Give him a chance to object, to tell me to stop, to choose his marriage and his pride over my protection. But if I told him, he'd try to stop me. He'd say he could handle it, that I was overreacting, that he needed to fight his own battles. And by the time he realized he was wrong, it would be too late. He'd be broken, and Vanessa would be filing for divorce, and Garrett would be moving on to his next victim. No, I'd tell Marcus eventually, but not until it was done, Not until Garrett was defeated and Marcus was safe. Even if it meant my son might never forgive me. I put my phone away and looked at Daniel. Pull the triggers, all of them. Let's finish this. The termination letter from Whitmore Automotive hit Garrett's desk on Wednesday afternoon. I know because Daniel had someone watching, and I received a text at 3:15. Package delivered. Target opened it personally. Left office 20 minutes later looking pale. By Thursday morning, 2 more of Garrett's major clients had called to discuss concerns about quality and delivery. By Thursday afternoon, 3 of his key suppliers had sent notices that they were suspending credit terms and requiring cash on delivery. I didn't hear from Marcus all week. He texted brief updates. Long day. Getting better at floor maintenance. Garrett says I'm improving. But nothing substantial. I suspected Vanessa had told him to maintain distance from me, to prove his independence, to show he didn't need his mother's help. If only he knew. Friday evening, I was in my office reviewing acquisition documents when my phone rang. Marcus. My stomach tightened. "Hi, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice normal. "Mom." He sounded strained, tired. "Can we talk? In person?" "Of course. Do you want to come to the house? I can make dinner." "No, I'm actually outside your office building. Can I come up?" I looked at the clock. 7:30 on a Friday night. "Of course, I'll tell security to send you up." He arrived 10 minutes later, and the sight of him made my chest ache. He'd lost weight in just 1 week, his face drawn and exhausted. There was a bruise on his forearm, dark purple against pale skin. His clothes hung loose, and he moved like someone in pain. "Marcus, what happened to your arm?" "I dropped a bucket of cleaning solution. It's fine." He sank into the chair across from my desk, and I saw him wince. "Mom, something weird is happening. Garrett's been in a terrible mood all week, like worse than usual. He's been screaming at everyone, slamming doors, locked himself in his office for hours yesterday. And today he came down to maintenance and just stared at me for like 5 minutes without saying anything. It was creepy. I kept my face neutral. Maybe he's having business problems. That's what Vanessa said. But Mom, he fired 3 people today. Just walked through the office and pointed at people and said, 'You're done. Clean out your desk.' One guy had worked there for 15 years. Marcus rubbed his face. And Vanessa is acting strange too. She keeps asking me if I've talked to you, if you've said anything about Garrett or the company. It feels like everyone's on edge about something." "Marcus." I chose my words carefully. "How are you doing? Really?" His shoulders sagged. "I'm exhausted. The work is brutal, and Garrett keeps adding more. Yesterday he had me cleaning the factory floor from 6 in the morning until 8 at night. My knees are killing me. My back hurts, and I can't remember the last time I slept more than 4 hours." He looked up at me, and I saw tears in his eyes. "But I can't quit, Mom. If I quit, it proves Garrett was right about me. That I'm weak, that I can't handle real work, that I'm not good enough for Vanessa. Sweetheart, there's something you need to understand." My phone buzzed. Daniel's name flashed on the screen with a message. Urgent. Garrett just called emergency board meeting for Monday morning. He knows something's up. Marcus saw my expression change. "What is it?" "Nothing. Work thing." I put the phone down. "Marcus, listen to me. You are not weak. You are not inadequate. And staying in a situation where someone is abusing you doesn't prove strength. It proves that you've been conditioned to accept abuse as normal. He's not abusing me. He called you a worm, Marcus. He put you on your knees scrubbing toilets when you have a design degree and years of professional experience. He's working you 14-hour days in manual labor that has nothing to do with learning the business. That's not tough love. That's systematic degradation designed to break your spirit." Marcus stood up abruptly. "Is this why you asked me here? To tell me to quit? Because I told you I can't." "I didn't ask you here. You came to me, remember?" I kept my voice gentle but firm. "And I think you came because part of you knows something is very wrong, and you need someone to tell you that it's okay to walk away." "I can't." His voice cracked. "Vanessa is pregnant, Mom. She told me last night. We're having a baby. I need this job. I need to prove to Garrett that I can provide for his daughter and grandchild. If I quit now..." Pregnant. Constance had been right. And now it was official. Public knowledge, which meant Vanessa was using it as leverage to keep Marcus trapped. "Congratulations," I said softly. "A baby is wonderful news. But Marcus, providing for your child doesn't mean destroying yourself. There are other jobs, better jobs. I don't want another job. The words burst out of him, angry and desperate. I want this one. I want Garrett to respect me. I want Vanessa to be proud of me. I want to be part of this family without feeling like I'm constantly failing some test I don't understand. What if the test is designed so you can't pass it? What if Garrett never intends to respect you no matter what you do? Then I'll prove you wrong. He headed for the door, then turned back. And Mom, whatever you're doing, whatever work thing made you look like that when you checked your phone, if it has anything to do with Garrett or his company, stop. Please, don't make this worse. He left before I could respond. I sat there for a long moment, then picked up my phone and called Daniel. What's this about a board meeting? Garrett called an emergency session for Monday at 9. According to my source, he's panicking. Whitmore's termination, the other clients backing out, suppliers demanding cash. He knows someone is orchestrating it, but he doesn't know who or why. He's going to try to rally the board, maybe look for emergency financing or a white knight buyer. Who else is on his board? Just 2 people, his brother-in-law and his personal attorney. It's basically a rubber stamp board. They'll support whatever he wants. Then we need to move faster than Monday. I pulled up the acquisition documents Margaret had sent. Can you be ready to make a formal offer by tomorrow afternoon? Helena, it's Friday night. Most of what we need won't be available until… I don't care. Call in favors, pay overtime, do whatever it takes. I want a formal written offer on Garrett's desk by tomorrow at 5 p.m. 20 million, all cash, 30-day close. That's significantly more than the company is worth right now. I know, but I want him to see that number and realize he's about to lose everything unless he takes it. Pride will make him refuse, but the number needs to be high enough that his attorney and brother-in-law will pressure him to accept. You're gambling that he's more prideful than smart. I've met Garrett Caldwell. Pride is all he has left. I worked through the night, reviewing every detail of the acquisition offer. By Saturday afternoon, Margaret had finalized the documents. At 4 p.m., I drove to Caldwell Industrial Solutions myself. The parking lot was nearly empty, just a security guard and a few weekend maintenance workers. I walked straight to Garrett's office on the 2nd floor. His secretary wasn't there, but his door was unlocked. I went inside, placed the sealed envelope containing our offer on his desk where he couldn't miss it, and left. On Monday morning, my phone rang at 7:30. Unknown number, but I recognized Garrett's voice immediately when I answered. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" He was practically screaming. "How dare you come into my building, into my private office? Your building was open and I have a business proposal. That's not trespassing, Garrett. That's called being proactive. This offer is insulting. 20 million for a company worth at least 60. Your company isn't worth 60 million anymore, and you know it. You've lost 3 major clients in 1 week, your suppliers are demanding cash you don't have, and you have a $7 million loan coming due in less than 8 months that you can't possibly repay. My offer is fair given current circumstances, and frankly, it's more generous than you deserve." There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice was cold. "This is you. You've been sabotaging my business. Why? Because I put your precious son to work in maintenance? Because I didn't hand him an executive position on his first day? You called him a worm, Garrett. You put him on his knees scrubbing toilets despite having skills and education that could benefit your company. You're working him 14 hours a day doing manual labor that has nothing to do with learning the business. And you're doing it because you enjoy it, because crushing people makes you feel powerful. He's weak. He's always been weak. And Vanessa deserves better than a man who can't even handle basic work without his mommy running to his rescue." The rage that had been building for 2 weeks crystallized into something cold and absolutely certain. "Here's what's going to happen, Garrett. You're going to accept my offer, or I'm going to wait exactly 8 months until your loan comes due and your creditors start liquidating your assets. Then I'll buy the pieces for a fraction of what I'm offering now. Either way, I get your company. The only question is whether you walk away with dignity and money or with nothing. You vindictive bitch. No, Garrett, I'm a mother protecting her son from a sadistic bully. There's a difference." I kept my voice perfectly level. "You have 72 hours to respond to my offer. After that, the price drops by $2 million for every week you delay. And Garrett, I'm not the only one coming for you. I have 3 more of your clients ready to terminate contracts, 5 suppliers ready to cut you off completely, and enough information about your fraudulent financial reporting to make your life very difficult if I choose to share it with the right people. I hung up before he could respond. Daniel called 30 seconds later. I'm guessing that was Caldwell? He's refusing, as predicted. So we move to phase 2? We move to phase 2. I pulled up my contact list. Start reaching out to the remaining clients. Make the pitch we discussed. Better service, better prices, more reliable delivery. I want at least 2 more terminations by end of week. Helena. Daniel's voice was cautious. Marcus called me this morning. He knows something is happening. He asked me point blank if you were going after Garrett. What did you tell him? I told him to talk to you. My phone buzzed with a text from Marcus. Mom, we need to talk. Now. I know what you're doing. I stared at that message, my heart sinking. This was the conversation I'd been dreading, the moment when my son would have to choose between accepting my help and clinging to his pride. I called him. He answered on the first ring. Is it true? His voice was shaking with anger. Are you trying to buy out Garrett's company? Are you sabotaging his business? Yes. How could you? The words were anguished. I asked you not to interfere. I asked you to let me handle this. And you went behind my back and what exactly? Destroyed his client base? Turned his suppliers against him? I gave him a fair offer for a company that's dying anyway. What happens next is his choice. His choice? Mom, you orchestrated this whole thing. You set him up to fail so you could swoop in and what? Save me? I don't need saving. Yes, Marcus, you do. I kept my voice calm even though my hands were shaking. Because in 6 months, Garrett was going to fire you. He was going to document every tiny mistake, build a case that you were incompetent, and terminate you for cause. Then he was going to use that to convince Vanessa to divorce you. Silence. I have proof, I continued quietly. I have testimony from his own wife about his plan. I have evidence of his financial problems, his pattern of abusing employees, everything. This isn't about me being overprotective. This is about me stopping a predator from destroying my son. Constance told you? His voice was barely a whisper. She called me. She was scared and guilty and brave enough to warn me what was coming. So yes, I acted. And I'd do it again, Marcus. Every single time. Vanessa is going to leave me. He sounded broken. When she finds out you did this, when her father loses his company because of you, she's going to blame me. She's going to take the baby and... If Vanessa leaves you because I refuse to let her father destroy you, then she was never going to stay anyway. The words hurt to say, but they were true. And Marcus, I know you love her, but love shouldn't require you to accept abuse. Love shouldn't mean standing by while someone degrades and humiliates you. I have to go. His voice was thick with tears. I can't talk to you right now. He hung up. I sat there in my office, staring at my phone, feeling like I'd just lost my son, even while trying to save him. But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. Because sometimes being a mother means making choices your children hate, doing things they can't forgive, becoming the villain in their story so they can survive to write another chapter. By Wednesday, 2 more clients had terminated their contracts with Caldwell. By Friday, the company had lost 68% of its revenue base in 2 weeks. And on Friday afternoon, Garrett Caldwell called me back. You win, he said, and his voice was empty, defeated. I'll take your offer. $20 million, 30-day close. $18 million, I said calmly. You waited a week. The price dropped, remember? He choked on whatever he was going to say. Fine, $18 million. But I want it in writing that you'll keep all current employees, that you won't gut the company. I'll keep employees who are qualified and productive. I'll fire employees who are there through nepotism or who have created hostile work environments, including you. This is my company, was your company. As of today, you're unemployed, Garrett. Congratulations, now you know how it feels. I hung up and immediately called Margaret. He accepted. Draw up the final papers. I want this closed in 3 weeks, not 4. Helena, your son. I know. He's not speaking to me, but he's safe. And someday, Maybe he'll understand that safety matters more than pride. I hoped I was right. The acquisition closed on a cold Tuesday morning in October, exactly 23 days after Garrett accepted my offer. I signed the papers in Margaret's office, transferred $18 million, and became the owner of Caldwell Industrial Solutions by 10 a.m. By noon, I'd renamed it Brennan Industrial Group. By 2 p.m., I'd fired Garrett Caldwell, effective immediately, with a severance package that was legally required but not particularly generous. I also terminated Vanessa's employment, citing that her position had been redundant and her salary unjustifiable, given her actual contributions. Garrett didn't go quietly. He screamed at me in the parking lot, called me every name he could think of, threatened lawsuits that his own attorney told him he'd lose. I stood there and let him rage, and when he finally ran out of steam, I said one thing: you had a choice. You could have treated my son with dignity. Instead, you chose cruelty. These are the consequences. Then I walked away and never looked back. Marcus didn't speak to me for 6 weeks. 6 weeks of texts that went unanswered, calls that went to voicemail, invitations that were ignored. Vanessa had moved them out of the condo her father owned and into a small apartment in Somerville. She'd also, according to Daniel's sources, spent those 6 weeks telling Marcus that I'd destroyed her family, that I'd stolen her father's legacy, that I was a controlling monster who couldn't let her son live his own life. Part of me wondered if I'd made a terrible mistake, if I'd sacrificed my relationship with Marcus to save him from a situation he hadn't wanted to be saved from, if I'd become the villain in his story after all. But then Constance called me on a Thursday afternoon in November. I left him, she said, her voice stronger than I'd ever heard it. I filed for divorce yesterday. I'm staying with my sister in Vermont, and I started seeing a therapist. And Helena, I wanted to thank you. Watching you fight for Marcus, watching you refuse to accept his abuse, it gave me permission to stop accepting my own. Constance, I'm so glad. How are you doing? Terrified, free, both at the same time. She laughed, and it was the first time I'd ever heard her laugh. Garrett's furious, of course, but he can't control me anymore. I have a good lawyer, Margaret recommended her, and we're going to make sure I get what I'm entitled to, which is apparently quite a lot, given Massachusetts divorce law and 35 years of marriage. You deserve every penny. So does Marcus. Helena, I know he's angry with you. Vanessa's been poisoning him against you, telling him you're vindictive and cruel. But give him time. He's a smart boy. Eventually, he'll see the truth. I wanted to believe her. But 6 weeks of silence from my son felt like forever. Brennan Industrial Group was thriving under new management. I'd brought in a CEO who actually knew manufacturing, had restructured operations, renegotiated supplier contracts, and won back 2 of the clients who'd left. The company would never be what it was in its prime, but it was stable, profitable, and no longer a toxic environment for its workers. I'd also created a new position, Director of Brand Development and Design. It was a real job with real responsibilities, overseeing everything from product packaging to marketing materials to client presentations. The salary was $75,000 a year, with benefits and profit sharing. It was the job Marcus should have had from the beginning, but I didn't offer it to him. Not yet, because anything I gave him now would feel like charity, like his mother buying him a job because he couldn't succeed on his own. He needed to come to me, needed to make the choice himself. I just didn't know if he ever would. Then, on a Sunday morning in early December, 3 months after that day in the bathroom at Caldwell Industrial Solutions, my doorbell rang. I opened it to find Marcus standing on my porch, looking thin and tired and older than his 29 years. His eyes were red, like he'd been crying. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. "Always." I stepped aside, and he walked into the house he'd grown up in, the house Richard had loved, the house where I'd raised him alone for so many years. We sat in the living room, and for a long moment, neither of us spoke. Finally, Marcus said, "Vanessa left me, filed for divorce yesterday. She's moving back in with her father. He bought a smaller place in Wellesley after selling the estate. She's taking the baby. I'll have visitation, but she'll have primary custody." My heart broke for him. "Marcus, I'm so sorry." "Don't be." He looked up at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Clarity. "She gave me an ultimatum. Either I never speak to you again, or she leaves. And I realize that anyone who makes me choose between them and my mother, anyone who demands that I cut off the person who raised me, who sacrificed everything for me, who only ever tried to protect me, that person doesn't actually love me. Tears were running down my cheeks, but I didn't wipe them away. I've been so angry at you, he continued. For months, I've been furious. I thought you'd ruined my life, destroyed my marriage, taken away my chance to prove myself. But then Constance came to see me last week. She told me everything. About Garrett's plan to fire me, about the pattern of abuse, about how she'd watched him destroy people for sport for 35 years. And I realized that you didn't ruin my life, Mom. You saved it. I'm sorry I didn't tell you what I was doing, I said softly. I'm sorry I went behind your back. But Marcus, I couldn't watch him destroy you. I couldn't stand by and do nothing. I know. He wiped his eyes. And I understand why you didn't tell me, because I would have stopped you. I was so desperate for Garrett's approval, so convinced that I could win him over that I couldn't see what he really was. I needed you to see it for me, to act when I couldn't. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at Richard's roses, brown and dormant now in the winter cold. Vanessa told me she's pregnant with a girl, he said, my daughter, and I keep thinking about what kind of father I want to be, what kind of man I want her to see when she looks at me. He turned back to face me. I don't want to be the guy who accepts abuse. I don't want to teach her that love means accepting cruelty, that family means tolerating degradation. I want to be the guy who knows his worth, who stands up for himself, who doesn't confuse gentleness with weakness. You're already that guy, Marcus. You just forgot for a little while, because I didn't have anyone teaching me the other half of the lesson. He smiled sadly. You taught me to be kind, to be good, to work hard and believe in people. But you forgot to teach me that sometimes people don't deserve kindness, that being good doesn't mean being a doormat, that working hard doesn't mean accepting abuse. I'm sorry. That was my failure as a mother. No, Mom, it was your success. You raised me to be decent. The world tried to punish me for it, and you stepped in to protect me. That's exactly what a parent should do. He crossed the room and hugged me, and I held my son the way I'd held him when he was 4 and his father left, when he was 13 and we buried Richard, when he was young and scared and needed to know someone would always catch him. I want that job, he said into my shoulder. Director of Brand Development, if the offer's still open. It's open. It's always been open. And I want to learn from you. Not just about business, but about boundaries, about standing up for myself, about being strong without being cruel, being kind without being weak. I can teach you that. We stood there for a long time, mother and son, healing the breach that cruelty and pride and misplaced loyalty had created. Eventually, we moved to the kitchen, and I made coffee while Marcus told me about his plans. He'd already found a good divorce attorney. He was going to fight for 50-50 custody of his daughter. He'd started seeing a therapist to work through everything that had happened. He was rebuilding, slowly but steadily. Thank you, he said as he was leaving, for everything, for raising me, for protecting me, for refusing to let Garrett break me, for being the kind of mother who loves fiercely enough to become the villain if that's what it takes. I'd do it again, I said, every single time. That's what love means, Marcus, fighting for the people who matter, even when they hate you for it. He hugged me one more time and left. I stood in my doorway, watching him drive away, and I thought about that September morning when I'd found him on his knees in that bathroom, about the rage and grief and absolute certainty I'd felt that I would not let this stand. Garrett Caldwell had lost everything: his company, his wife, his daughter's respect, his reputation. He was living in a modest house, working as a consultant for a fraction of his former income, facing the reality that power built on cruelty always eventually collapses. Vanessa had learned no lessons. She was still entitled, still blaming everyone but herself, still using her daughter as leverage in her petty wars. But Marcus was free. Constance was free. And I had protected my son the only way I knew how, with all the resources at my disposal, with strategic precision, with a mother's fierce and uncompromising love. Something special had come, just like I'd promised myself that day in the parking lot. Justice, liberation. and the knowledge that protecting the people you love isn't optional, it's sacred.